Ana Barbosa-Póvoa, bueno, realmente es Ana Paula Ferreira Díaz, ¿eh? Ya sabéis que a nuestros compañeros portugueses les gusta aglutinar nombres. Viene del técnico de Lisboa y, bueno, supongo que todos la conoceréis porque si buscáis, pues tiene, no sé si 250 y pico publicaciones, que es más de lo que algunos de nosotros hemos leído. Y ha trabajado mucho en distintos temas, pero en los últimos años principalmente en cadena de suministro con un énfasis en la sostenibilidad, que es un poco el tema de su presentación. Entonces, bueno, no te quito más tiempo, Ana. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Rubén. Si me perdone, I'm going to switch to English. My castelhano no é bom. Eu prefiro hablar in English. First of all, I want to thank the organization for the invitation. It is a pleasure for me to be here. Thank you very, very much. So I have this opportunity to share with you what we have been doing in Lisbon in this area, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So I want to thank again Ruben and the organization and everything that you have been done for my pleasure here. Thank you. So as Ruben said, I'm coming from University of Lisbon, more properly from Técnico, that is the School of Engineering in University of Lisbon. So you can see here, we have 3 campuses. I just put here 2 because are the 2 where we teach. So this is the main campus in central Lisbon, in Alameda, and this is the new campus that is where we have the industrial engineering, where I am most of the time, that is near Cascais. I'm coming from the Department of Engineering and Management, and my group is the Operation and Logistics groups within the Center of Management Studies. So, my talk today, as the title suggests, is going to present to you some challenges and perspectives on sustainable supply chains. So, looking into the industry supply chains, we can start in the product development and we end up in the supply chain where we distribute these products to the clients. And so my focus today is going to be here. And what is really a supply chain? Of course you know, but just to explain a bit our basis, indeed we have a very complex system of flow of products and services that start from the raw material manufacturers till the end of product remanufactures, okay? Often this part or this activity in the supply chain does not exist, but we claim within sustainable supply chains that they must exist, okay? And so this system is connected essentially by transportation and storage activities. Of course, you have the production, but production by itself is a huge system, and supply chain typically looks into these 2 main activities. And of course, it must deal with information and planning, and this must be done in a very integrated way. Okay, and then companies that are involved in these supply chains, they have essentially 2 goals. Costs, minimizing costs to get as much as profit as possible, and service levels, the maximum service levels. So these are the traditional goals that we find in supply chains. All right, so having said that, this small introduction, what I'm going to share with you today is, okay, what are the main challenges in supply chains? What have been we academics and industry been doing towards this building these supply chains? What have been companies and academic communities doing is essentially, and what we did or what we are doing at Técnico, and then some thoughts for future. All right, so starting in the main point. Why sustainable supply chains? Why this topic? Well, typically we academics, we tend to look into the needs of the society, and indeed this has emerged from companies. So companies, and here you cannot read there, sorry, but this is Gartner Index. So it's an organization that looks into the supply chains in the world and classifies every year the best ones. So makes the ranks of the top 25 supply chains. And you can find them here. Of course, you know all these brands, okay? You have what they call the master supply chains, that are supply chains that have been in this ranking for the last 10 years in the top 5 positions, that are Apple, we know, Procter & Gamble, and Amazon. So these are the main or the most important supply chains in the world. And then this rank here typically changes. This year, number 1 is Colgate-Palmolive, that we also know. And then the second one is one that you know very well, okay? Inditex, so is a Spanish-based supply chain, and so on. All the others we know and are part of our life. And these companies have identified essentially 3 main challenges. Okay? And these challenges have been changing during the years, and this, in 2019, so this year, they defined these 3 main challenges as what they need really to do to get a very good business. So increase customer intimacy, what means doing what we need, okay? So personalizing as much as possible. This is something that the companies are doing more and more. And then, of course, driving business based on digital strategies. So Internet of Things is there. Industry supply chains 4.0, Industry 4.0. And then sustainable supply chains. So what they call leveraging ecosystems. What is this? Well, this company says, okay, we need to build sustainable supply chains. For that, we need to cooperate within the different entities in the supply chain, and we need to incorporate external partners, okay? This is very important. And all this system must cooperate to find the so-called trade-offs between the 3 pillars of sustainability: the economic, that is there, environmental and social goals. So this is what the companies say that is very important, okay? So they are aware of that. But why this has emerged? Because with globalization, supply chains got more and more complex, and they face huge problems, okay? So caused by logistic, environmental, and social aspects. So we see every day in the news problems within the supply chains. I put some here, quite recent. For instance, this one that says the shipping industry must go carbon neutral to survive, otherwise it will have lots of problems. And now a huge problem that is the plastic supply chain, and China decided not to receive anymore the plastics coming from the United States, okay? So these are some examples. And going more into deep and picking up again the plastic supply chain, where we have the products that we all use, water, yeah, like this. But we can do something with them. We can recycle them and remanufacturing them, but for that we need to have the conditions. And the Occidental countries do not want to do it, or do it in a very low level, and so they send the waste, especially the Americans, to China, okay? You see here the flows. But China decided to say, no, that's enough, we don't want more, and so they move it to Malaysia. And Malaysia now is facing these kind of things. So environmental impacts, very, very negative to society. Another supply chain that we all know, some of us are wearing jeans, yeah? This is a slide that I got from a colleague from Aachen University, Greatwater, and is a German brand, where they did a deep analysis on this supply chain, and I'm going to share it with you. So the transportation and production of jeans. This starts in Kazakhstan with the harvesting of the cotton that can be done manually or with machines, essentially in Kazakhstan, but might be also in India. And then the cotton is sent to Turkey, okay, to be treated. In Turkey, it suffers the spinning, and then from here, it goes to Taiwan to get the color, okay, the dyeing of the one. Also, then this cotton, goes to Poland, okay, to be waved, another treatment in the supply chain, and then this cotton with products from France and Italy, namely the labels and the buttons and the ribbons from Italy, everything goes to Philippines, where many people put the jeans together, okay, where manual work is very cheap, okay? So, and we get the jeans, okay? We have the jeans, but they are not ready yet because we like what we call the pumice. That is, you know, these parts here, not completely blue. So the Greek people do this in this supply chain. So the jeans go to Greece, the jeans are pumiced, and then finally, they go to Germany, and they are sold, okay? They are sold. So people buy the jeans, they use them, and then at the end, the jeans are still good, because even today, we use the jeans with not very good conditions, but the people get tired, and they say, okay, we are going to reuse these jeans to other people can use it, and so this company collects the jeans and sends it to Netherlands, and they sorted them, and the good ones they send to Africa. Okay, so this is the supply chain of this brand. Here is the reference. Okay, what do we have here? So a pair of jeans typically consumes 64,000 kilometers to be ready, okay? Consumes 8,000 liters of water, lots of other materials like insecticides, pesticides, and so on, often bad and harmful working conditions that creates problems in the people that work in the supply chain, and then we have child labor problems and so on. So this is something that is not an exception, okay? This is something that we are not aware, but it exists, okay? 2 years ago, I visited Bangladesh. It was for me a very terrible experience because, you know, it's terrible the conditions that the people really live, but they are happy. This is even more terrible for me, yeah? Because we demand, and indeed, it's amazing the conditions of everyone over there. And this is, the apparel supply chain is one of the supply chains that explores more these people. Anyway, so we have a problem. Can we do something? Does this have really an impact, or these two cases are just two cases? Well, there is a very recent study for Carnegie Mellon University and McKinsey, and they really say that indeed supply chains are the main responsible for the impacts. Look, here is the impact, environmental impacts, okay, associated with the goods that we all consumed. And you see here, the supply chains are the one that have the higher impact, not our consumption. And if we pick this and we look into the different activities in the supply chain, we can see that the impacts that are hidden within the supply chains are the ones that have higher importance. Okay, so there is a need to collaborate within the entities to put these impacts that are hidden, you know, clear to everyone. All right, so having said that, you might say, okay, but this is a problem. Are we doing something? Fortunately, we are doing something, okay? We are trying to move from the so-called traditional paradigm of the supply chains that where the cost and service levels are the main concerns to the sustainable supply chains, where we try to get the trade-offs between the three pillars, as I said to you before. All right? So, what has been done towards these sustainable supply chains? First, companies were forced to control emissions, okay? By legal regulations, they said, no, you cannot emit more than a certain level of CO2 or whatever, yeah? So this was the first step. Then, this is what we call output-oriented measures in supply chains. Then we moved to the production-oriented measures, where apart from the emissions, you also try to reduce the waste, okay? And so you explore what we call process integration. So you reduce waste, treating effluents, treating waste, controlling also emissions. So this is the second step, and is where most of the supply chains are still there, okay? Then some supply chains move a little bit further and try to recycle the end-of-life products, okay? So we have here a successful case that is the paper. So you have the paper, you use it, and then you can recover it, okay? So this is product and product-oriented measures. And then further on is where we are trying to go. Apart from this more physical integration of flows, we also want to look into two aspects, the human conditions and the environmental conditions, okay? So product life cycle goals and society. This is what really built the so-called sustainable supply chains. Where you have the different activities in the supply chain, you have constraints that we are very good in modeling, okay? So natural resources availability, government regulations, and then we have behavior, customers. We all want the best products. Maybe we think about environmental impacts, human conditions, but maybe we just think once and not more, yeah? So our, let's say, incentives is to buy, and we don't worry too much about the origin. Then you have society expectations in terms of health and conditions of life, okay? So this is what sustainable supply chains should look into. All right, so, and having said that, what industry and academia has been doing towards these sustainable supply chains? If we start by Colgate-Palmolive, if you remember, was the first one in the rank. They got into the rank in the first position because of the sustainability that, or the sustainable measures that they are implementing in their supply chains. So they are looking into the communities where they are located, and they are trying to help them. They are trying to, what they call, delight consumers. They are trying to reduce water consumption. They are trying to reduce the impacts, so emissions, really to reduce impacts in climate and the environment. So these are, they have special measures to do this, which is very good. Also, if we go to another index that is Dow Jones Sustainability Index, there are two companies here that are very well known in sustainability, and you have here one from Finland that is a pulp and paper company, and they work very well in the closed loop supply chains, okay? So they work a lot on responsible wood sourcing. For instance, now they are banning, they are not buying, for instance, wood from Amazonia, from Brazil, because of these fires, okay? They also focus a lot on logistics optimization, so routing is for them very, very important. And they also look into inserting the end-of-life products again into the supply chain. Also, Unilever is one of the top European companies that looks into sustainability. And they want to reduce, for instance, sugar in their products, improve oral health. Then they have sustainable sourcing, rethinking packing, circular economy, sustainability, then connecting with small farmers, and as you see here, sustainable sourcing, logistics and control towers, and distribution hubs are delivering, grow, and contributing to Unilever Sustainable Living Plan. So, for instance, they use a lot optimization in their planning. Okay, this company is investing a lot in good decision supporting tools to help them planning better their supply chains. Okay, so these are how companies sell or try to sell to us what they are doing in terms of sustainable supply chains. What about academics? Well, if we look into the papers that have been published in sustainable supply chains, you see how they have been increasing. Okay, here it was not finished, but you see from 2099 till 2015, there was an increase. And if we look into the operation research methods that we have here, essentially optimization is the most used method when we deal with supply chains, design and planning supply chains essentially. If we look into the different pillars, we can see that the economic pillar is the most studied, typically minimizing costs, maximizing net present value, minimizing risk, or maximizing profit. This is what we define as objective functions. If we go into the environmental pillar that is not so well studied, we try to minimize waste. You see here, essentially, minimizing CO2 emissions. These are the objectives that typically we use in our models, okay? And then if we go to the social pillar that few people have been looking, but it's very few people, typically we work in the creation of jobs. This is very difficult to model, and this is why people do not go into this objective function. Okay, so we have been trying to do something. And these models have been applied to some industrial sectors, especially, look here, is essentially essentially here is chemical. Why chemical? Because of the impacts, okay? Environmental impacts. Chemical industries are very much concerned with environmental impacts. All right, so we come to a situation where sustainability must be embedded in the supply chains, but we know, we have the three pillars, but we know that this is something like this, okay? The economic one is well treated, but the other two, no. So the challenge here for us, as operation research and statistic people, is really, okay, we have complex systems that have different aspects like multi-objective problems, we have different stakeholders that we need to put in our models, we do not have indicators, we have decisions that are interconnected, are not independent, and data is a mess, okay? So, let's see, okay. So, we should develop decision support tools to help companies in doing better, and also we need to work in indicators to put in our models, okay? And this is something that we have been trying to do in my group, okay? So now I'm going to share with you some of the research that we have been doing. All right, so essentially we focus in these three main aspects. The first one is how to simultaneously incorporate economic, environmental, and social concerns in the design and planning of supply chains. So this is one of the questions that we want to answer. The second one is how to adequately introduce environmental impact indicators in the supply chain design and planning. And the third one is really how to model the social aspects, okay? So the first one, try to put the three together and get trade-offs, and the other two want to go deep into environmental and social aspects. All right, so what did we do? we built a decision support system that we call Bloom, that essentially is a MILP model, okay, where we have uncertainty treated by scenarios. So it's a stochastic model, and we, as I said to you, is multi-objective, so we try to solve it through towards using, augmented Epson constraint method. So our system really is a multi-objective mixed integer linear programming model, okay? And what characterizes it? Indeed, you have a set of inputs. We consider first, okay, the main activities in the supply chain, raw materials, supply, production, warehousing, distribution, the use, and then collecting and sorting, so the remanufacturing. All these activities are in the model. Then we have a set of inputs that are generic, like, for instance, supply chain capacities, possible locations to localize the entities of the supply chain, stock capacity, product demands, and so on. Then we have the raw material costs, and then we have social aspects and environmental aspects, okay? The environmental, to model the environmental into this system, we use that is a life cycle approach. Okay, so it's not very difficult. It's another world, but we can look into it, and we have people, experts in life cycle approach, and we are able to put them into our model. And then on the social, we have been treating data with statistic methods to come up with some social economic indicators. All right, so the outputs. We have a set of solutions, as is multi-objective, and then we can look into the solutions and see which ones are better in terms of the different objectives. And one thing is sure, when you apply this to real cases that I'm going to show you, companies do not like to have one solution. No, they want to have a set of them, and then they like to choose, okay? So I will show you some of these examples. Okay, so the outputs then give us the total cost, or NPV, for instance, the identification of the environmental hotspots. What do I mean? The critical points in the supply chain that we need to look, and then the social impact distribution, how the supply chain that we are designing and planning really impacts in the social aspect. All right, so going a little bit into more the model. As I said, we have the maximization of net present value, for instance, where we have the net earnings from considering several costs and also incomes. And then we have the fixed capital investment of the facilities. And of course, you can write the equations. Then we have the environmental objective. And as I said to you, we are using a life cycle approach. We are using the so-called recipe, that is a methodology developed by the people from Netherlands. And you can have in this methodology a single score that we do not use, because here the aggregation has big question marks in scientific terms. So we typically use the midpoint categories, like, for instance, water depletion or CO2 emissions, okay? And these are in our models. Recipe gives us data that then we can put in our models, okay? So, for instance, an example, in terms of objective function, you want to minimize environmental impact, and you have impacts, for instance, for the production and remanufacture. So here you have the amount produced, the amount remanufactured, then you have environmental impact that you get from the recipe. So it's not difficult, okay? You just need to understand very well what you are writing there. Then you have the environmental impacts of transportation, you have the flows, the distances, and the weights associated with this. And then you have also, for instance, the environmental impact of the entity installation because it uses land, and this has impacts. So this is an example how we translate the life cycle approach to our models. Then we have the social component. And here we are just doing a small bit. So we want to promote job creation in less developed regions or stimulate regional development, okay? And what we do is that we have, for instance, here, indicators that if the plant is locating in a certain area, has higher weight, for instance. So it's not complicated for us, yeah? So you have the fixed workers at each entity, the workers per square meter based on the capacity installed, the workers used by the technologies installed, the workers in the road transportation modes, and the workers at air and sea transportation modes, okay? So you know how much that supply chain is going to create in terms of jobs, okay? So, and then we have the constraints. I'm not going to put here all the constraints, but of course we have the so-called material balance constraints, entity and transportation capacity, flows, inventory storage, transportation modes, and so on and so on and so on. Okay? So a set of constraints that really describes the supply chains. Okay, so this is the model, and then we start by applying it to real cases. Okay? Fortunately, we have some interesting relations with Portuguese and not only Portuguese supply chains, and we were able, through my master and PhD students, to get data and apply this to the models. Okay, so I'm going to share with you these 5 cases where we have different goals in terms of study. So in the first case, is a supply chain batteries, okay? And we are trying to use the 3 objectives. The second case is a food retail company, where typically we explore the use of 2 different life cycle approaches, and I'm going to go into deep into that. Then we have electronics component supply chain, where we explore the social indicator based on GDP indicators. Pulp and paper, where we go into the life cycle scope, and then tire supply chain, where we explore different indicators for social component. Okay, so the first one, this is Portugal, as you well know, yeah? And I'm here in Lisbon. And this company is a Portuguese company that produces batteries for the cars. And they came to us because they had a problem in the distribution, and it was very costly for them. And they said, you are very good in optimization, mathematical models. Maybe you can help us, because we are trying to redo our distribution part of the supply chain. Maybe you can help us to minimize costs. And they said, yeah, of course, but we are also going to explore not only the cost, but the environmental impacts and the social impacts. And they said, what is this? We will explain to you. So we got the data. So this is not a very complicated supply chain, because they just have one manufacturing company factory that is located in Oeiras, next to Tagus Park, the campus that I showed to you. And then they had these warehouses distributed in Portugal. So the factory sends the batteries with large trucks to the warehouses, and from the warehouses, they use small trucks to the garages to put the batteries, okay? But for sure you know that batteries are recycled products, okay? And they tend to recover the batteries. They want the garages to send back the batteries, and four batteries gives a new one, okay? So for them it's very important this, but they have parallel markets, and this is another thing that we studied, how much they should pay to the garage people to send the batteries to them and not to the parallel markets, okay? Anyway, so this is the supply chain that we look into. And this, indeed, the decisions are this one. As I said to you, warehouse location essentially, production levels, storage levels, distribution planning, and supply chain planning. And the objective was to minimize the cost, the environmental impact using the recipe, and maximize the social benefit, trying to create jobs in the less developed parts of Portugal. And you are going to see that the result was not very interesting for the company. Okay, so this is the result. This is what they had, okay? This is what we got when we minimize costs and also when we minimize environmental impact, of course, because, look, we are just looking into the distribution part of the supply chain. Minimizing costs is minimizing distances, okay? And minimizing distances is minimizing environmental impacts, okay? So we were expecting this. But they didn't have a clue that optimizing the routing, they were optimizing the CO2 emissions, okay? So they were very happy with that. And this, they were very happy, and then we show them this scenario that is maximizing social impact. And they said, Ana, you are joking with us for sure. This is Alentejo, yeah, in Portugal. We do not sell anything in Alentejo. Are we going to put the warehouses there? And I said, of course, this is just to show to you that maybe you can put some. Okay, forget, we are not going to put anything there, okay? We have one there, that is okay, but this is not possible, of course, we knew that. But it was just one thing to feel that sometimes we put the things in the models, but then we need to be critical on the results, yeah? Okay, and so they said, all right, we like this, but please show us different alternatives. And, okay, this is a very simple representation of the model, but they wanted, okay, we want to have gain in cost, gain in social benefit, and we also wanted to minimize the changes in the distribution, okay? And, sorry, and we were able to come up with a set of solutions, and of course, then they chose to implement this one. That for us was quite good because it was a solution very close to the ideal point in the multi-objective optimization. Okay, so this was one example that then they implemented, and they also put this into their sustainability report. That it was very interesting for them. All right, so this is an example. So improvements, the message here is that improvements in the all three pillars of sustainability were obtained comparatively with the existing network. So with our models, we could help them in building a more sustainable distribution part of their supply chain. So this was one example. Another example is a Portuguese food distribution company that maybe you know. I can tell the name in words not written there. That is Pingo Doce in Portugal. So Jerónimo Martins is a company that we work a lot. And Jerónimo Martins also came to us to redo their distribution supply chain. They had problems because the warehouses that they have were not enough in terms of capacity to sell essentially to the south of Portugal, to Algarve, where everyone, especially Lisbon people, go to Algarve, not the people from the north that like to go to the mountains, yeah? I'm provoking José Fernando. But yeah, people from Lisbon, if you want to meet anyone in August from Lisbon, you go to Algarve. Everyone is there. And so, but the temperature of the water is not like in Valencia, but it's very good. Anyway, so they came to us to, they wanted to expand and reduce their supply chain, and we looked into it. But they have environmental concerns, and so they asked us to put that into the model too. And then, based on this data, we also study essentially the impact of using different LCA methods, okay? And we explored the recipe that I showed to you, but also the PEF. PEF is another method that the European community is developing because they say that recipe is too much consultancy driven, okay? And so the European community wants a more open methodology, okay? And we studied, and in this case, you see scenario S1. This is very simple, the representation, because we cannot show much more than this, but essentially you have, this is what we got when we minimizing costs. This is what we got when we were minimizing environmental impacts. So both methods return the main configurations, smaller warehouses with all products. And this, again, is the social scenario that is not feasible for the company, okay? But what the message that I want to pass here is essentially this. The impact categories of the main concern are different when we are using different methodologies in terms of life cycle approach. So the message is, even using very detailed models, you need to be careful comparing supply chains, okay? Especially if you use different ways of measuring environmental impacts. So careful must be taken when comparing different supply chains with different methods, okay? And this is something that many papers do. They compare things that are not comparable, okay? All right, then another supply chain. This is a European-based electronics component that we got with some collaborations that we have in Germany also. And here we developed a bit more the model, and we explored again the three pillars of the sustainability, and we did some studies putting some levels on the, let's say, we maximize the NPV, we minimize the environmental impacts, we maximize the social, but we put that we could maximize the social component, but only with 95% of the maximum NPV, okay? Because the company said, yeah, we can invest on that, but if we not lose too much money, okay? And then we also study another scenario of 85%, and then we put one free. Okay, and what you get here is different solutions again, okay? And you see that the economic indicator changes a lot. Also the social, look here, you have much less job creation because you are maximizing the NPV, okay? The environmental impact is a little bit higher than when we try to minimizing it, but you can get trade-offs, okay? So with this study and with the detail of the model, we could conclude that indeed it's very important to have an integrated framework where you can put the different objectives and build a multi-objective approach for the companies then to choose, okay? Pulp and paper. What we explore here was essentially the life cycle scope. So typically, what companies do is minimizing CO2, but minimizing CO2 is one part of the environmental impacts, okay? And so we look into expanding this scope, and we concluded that, for instance, you have here scenario A, all supply chains activities. You consider everything in terms of environmental impact. In scenario B, you only consider transportation. That's typically what companies do when dealing with supply chains in terms of CO2. And if you compare here, when you do transportation, okay, only transportation, you get NPV is higher, but the environmental impact is worse. Okay? So we need to be careful when we are modeling the different components of the environmental contribution. Okay? All right. And also you can see from the different scenarios here and the scope that the contributions, for instance, of the entities, the production contribution maintains more or less the same, but you see the transportation changes along when we consider the detail on modeling the environmental impacts in the supply chain, okay? So, concluding here, well, the computer is almost there, considering the different life cycle scopes in the environmental impact assessment of the supply chain results in different design and planning decisions. This is very important. So if you are detailed, you get a supply chain much more comprehensive, much more sound than if you are not so detailed in your model. Okay. Finally, we go to the social indicator, and we studied 3. Job created, population, creating jobs in where the population density is lower, or creating jobs where the GDP is lower, okay? Typically in the literature, you find this one, creating jobs. It doesn't matter where, okay? But, as you know, if you put weights in the objective function, of course, the results are completely different, okay? And this is what we did here. And, sorry about this, what we conclude is that we have, our models allow us really to compare the different options that we have. So these models can also be useful in policy making decisions, okay? All right, so summarizing, almost finishing, we have different cases using the same type of model, and we can have different contributions using it. So is where we, as Operation Research and Statistic Community, we can contribute to help the companies in their decisions, okay? So, but what can we do with this? We can understand the connections between the different supply chains activities, obtaining a better combining performance across the supply chain. We can understand better the impact of these decisions in the different pillars of sustainability. We can identify the hotspots in environmental component, and also we can identify social responsible alternatives than to promote more a social inclusive supply chain, okay? But this is not enough. We have much more to do. Especially, we need to work more into the modeling of these components, both sustainability, but not only. We need to incorporate better the uncertainty in these models, and the risk and resilience. These are very important things in supply chains. And on the OR approaches, we need efficient solution methods. I didn't show to you about the CPU times, but they are not very nice, especially if you are maximizing social impacts. It runs for days, okay? It's very, very difficult to solve because this objective really does not work well in the search of the solution, doesn't help at all. So this is something that we need people really helping us on this. It's very difficult to get zero gap dreams, okay? No zero gap here, okay? 5%, very good. 10%, very, very good, okay? So this is very difficult to solve, but companies don't care about zero gap, okay? They care about solutions that then they can work on, all right? But if we can find efficient methods, much better, okay? And so these models also need much more detail. I didn't go into the detail. You can go, if you want, I can send you the papers, but we need to do much more, okay? And if we do this, then we can achieve the so-called sustainable supply chain, where we account for the economic, environment, social pillar, and at the end, we can contribute to organizations, environmental, and society, okay? So this is the idea. Using our models, try to construct better supply chains, okay? And that's it. Of course, I didn't do this by myself, so this is my group. I want to thank them because they are great, okay? Lots of women, yeah, that's it. We have, you know, Technic is a school of engineering. To tell you, we have 100 full professors, and we are just 12 women full professors, okay? So it's not, but they are all nice. Huh? Anyway, this is Lisbon, for sure you know, and I also want to thank the financial aspect, okay? Portuguese National Science Foundation for the money that they have given to us. So that's it. Thank you very much. I think I'm in my time, okay? So questions?
Okay, we have time for questions.
I know that I'm very clear.
Let me start. Thank you very much for the presentation. We always ask our friends and known people, can you please come over and give a 1-hour talk? This takes time to prepare and to work, so we really thank you a lot. So I know some of your work, and I was sometimes surprised that the minimum cost solution is very similar to the minimum environmental impact solution. But for example, for the apparel example you gave, that's clearly not the case. Mm-hmm. No. So how do you convince a company that, unless the company, in my opinion, unless the company is fully convinced that they have to go into the environmental impact minimization route, how do you convince them to spend much more money on making the solution more environmentally friendly? Okay.
Companies, they have the economical, that's it, okay? Making profit, that's it, we are here to make money. That is what they say to us. But then if we say to them, look, you can get money, you can make money, and you can also contribute to society, especially to the environmental impact, reducing a little bit of your profit. Nowadays, they are happy because the stakeholders, the different people that invest in the companies, are more driven to environmental objectives. So they say, if the supply chain gives us money, but is also friendly of the environmental, we do not worry in getting a little bit less. Because they get so much. The thing is that these supply chains they have a lot of money, so if they reduce 5%, they do not get poor, okay? And the image of the company improves a lot. And indeed, they invest, they get more money because they invest in image. And this is why companies are really investing in sustainable supply chains. Don't you think? They are not really very concerned with our healthy life and so on. They are a little bit, but the image for them is very important. And also the government, especially in Europe, and you know that, the European community is pressing a lot. So, for instance, the first company that I showed to you, they put a project where they got money to reduce their supply chain distribution, saying, look, if we do this, we will reduce the environmental impact and so on. And so the Portuguese government gave them money. Okay, and so companies, the Jerónimo Martins, for instance, is very good also in getting this type of projects. And if we help them, they are very keen. So I think companies really are trying to do something on that. So they just need to understand if they are going in the right way, because they don't know. Okay, so I think we are in the good path.
So please bear with me while I press on this issue, because it's really interesting. There's some European projects going on, like transforming transport, for example, a very big project at the European level, with many, many institutions working, and some institutions were working on the political aspects. So our experience with optimization in routing problems with not so large companies is slightly different, right? So the companies are concerned on profits, and unless somebody complains or unless there is some regulation forbidding them to do some things, they will not go into the environmental route, because otherwise they tell you they die. They cannot do that.
But they can.
Yeah.
For instance, you know that now the environmental impacts is quite controlled in cities, yeah? For instance, in Lisbon now, in certain areas, you cannot go with the old cars and so on. Jerónimo Martins, for instance, is very concerned with the routing and with the type of vehicles that they are using in the routing. One of the works that we are doing with them is really to understand how the electric vehicles can be used and how much these electric vehicles will contribute to the environmental impacts, reducing as much as possible the cost, because the cost for them in electric vehicles is still very high. But they are concerned with that, so we are doing some work with them on that. So indeed, the legal aspect is very important to drive the companies. But sometimes they come with solutions if we show them that they are useful. Okay. I think our role there is essentially that.
But then I would like to know your opinion, given your vast experience in this area. So do you think companies by themselves will get to these environmental and societal better solutions, or
no, they go.
Governments need to drive them through regulations in order to force them to go there?
No, they go. For instance, I worked with Bayer. Okay, Bayer is a huge company. And they are concerned with this. Okay? So it's not the regulations. They exist, but they are concerned with this. And they are doing a lot. And as I said to you, for instance, Unilever is an example. They really do these things. They do a good routing. They hire you. They have a huge amount of PhDs working for them. The group is huge. I have some colleagues working there. And they do the work, and they implement. Okay? BASF, for instance, is another company that works very well on that. So they are doing it. The big companies, definitely. The small companies, we need to help them a lot. Okay?
Okay, then maybe there is still some hope for all of us. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was very interesting to see how our mathematics and statistics can be used in the real world, in practice, and having results. Clearly, we all know that the social pillar is the one in which we are still, let's say, grasping the surface. We don't even know how to measure that. But for the moment being, I would like to challenge your approach of having the social concerns as a goal. Don't you think that they should be a constraint? A way of moving companies towards a more socially responsible policy would be to incorporate some constraints, not allowing that the costs related to labor, the costs related to transportation could be higher than or lower than, and that could show the impact instead of having as a goal in which we don't have indicators, having as constraints. Have you think about that?
No, yeah, indeed we do that also. As I said, using the social as objective is a nightmare. And some of the cases, I didn't go deep into that, but some of the cases we use it as a constraint. But one thing very important is that, for instance, when you get in the companies, when you get funds from the European community, for instance, in Portugal we know, yeah, if the company invests in the north, they get more funds than if they invest in the area of Lisbon, especially due to this GDP internal development. Is why we put it there. Okay, so this is a way that we can show to the companies, if they invest in certain areas in Portugal or in Spain or whatever, they can get then more money for the European projects. And we can do it as you do, as you say. Okay, to get the money, you need to create this amount of jobs. Okay, and of course, we can put that in the constraint, yeah. I think it's a good idea because putting that in the objective function, we are not happy with that. We cannot get very good results. But yeah, thank you very much. I think that's the one way. The problem is what is really important for modeling in terms of the social goal. We are not yet happy with it, okay? GDP indicator is very good, I think is one way, but we are not yet happy. We are now exploring what is called the social life cycle approach, but it was developed by Harvard and MIT, but it's very, very fuzzy. It's really very, very fuzzy. I don't like it, but it's something that we are now trying to explore, to put in our models.